Hello, so it's Michael here, and today I believe we're on part 7 of the infantry system tutorial. And in this particular episode, I thought I would start the process of showing you how to set up some sort of way of handling multiple containers. So this is for things like chests, barrels, anything where there's going to be an additional infantry that you want the player to be able to interact with and possibly transfer items to and from. So before we can actually get to the transferring side, we kind of need to set something up where we actually have an additional infantry to display. And once we've got that sorted out, we can look at setting up the logic to handle that transfer, as it were. So just as a quick overview in terms of where we got to on the last episode, just so you can kind of all caught up, we added the ability to pick up a specific item called a health potion, and when it's in focus, if you press the E key, it heals the health. So that's kind of where we got to. So as I mentioned, what we kind of need to do is create something that's going to allow us to have an additional container. So what I'm going to do is actually just go to the blueprints folder. Actually no, I'll do it in the infantry system one just to keep everything together. What I'm going to do is create a new blueprint. It's going to be a type of actor. I'm going to call this one BP underscore container. And the reason I'm calling it container is just so this can be a base class, and this container is going to have an infantry system component on it, like so. We can probably build the other things. Put a name in there for container for now. Obviously we can always update that in any child ones that we create. Okay. Yep. So that's kind of like our base container. So what I'm then going to do is create a new blueprint, and that's going to be a child of that BP container. I'll call that BP container chest. Again, you can name these however you like, as long as they make sense to you. So with the chest blueprint opened, you should be able to see the infantry system component in that we added. Now, I'm going to go ahead and add some static meshes. So it's going to be chest base. And then add another one. Yes, and that's going to be chest lid. Now I just need to select the meshes for the cube. Okay, and then add the mesh for the lid. Again, if you've got some meshes already, that's great. I'm just using cubes here, for example. So for the lid, I'm going to go ahead and move that up. And then we can change the size. There we go. Just like so. Now, the first thing I want to do is just quickly add a little quick timeline just to animate the lid opening and closing. TL underscore open lid. I'm just going to go in and add a new float track. I'm just going to do this based on a vector, so not vector, a float. It's going to be start at 0, and then it's going to end on 1 a second later. I'm going to add a little bit of smoothing on that, and then we're going to make sure that it's set to use the last keyframe. If you don't do that, it'll use whatever length it's set, so you can end up with this gap. But in this case, we only ever want it to use the end keyframe. So that done, we get the chest lid, we can, well, we want to set its rotation, so we'll check the axis, that's on the roll, I believe that is. Yeah, so that's the X. So set to relative rotation. We'll do that on the update. And I'm just renaming the track for the timeline, so that's going to be rotation. Do that as rotation alpha. Yep, so that just updates the pin just so we know what it's for. And then we can do a lerp. Plug in the alpha. So when it's closed, so it's 0, we want it to be at a rotation of 0. But when it's open, we want it to be about minus 70 with the looks of it. We'll come back in. So for B, we'll do minus 70. And what we need now is some way of being able to trigger that. So we don't have any specific interaction system as of yet on here. So it is making me wonder if possibly set up a very quick one. Just so we're not having to rely on the overlaps that we currently have on the world items. And that might be the best option. Okay. Yeah, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to set up a quick interaction system. It's going to be very quick. It's be great for quick prototype, but you may want to switch it out for something else, a better system. I do already have an interaction system tutorial on my channel. There are a few parts to it, so if you're looking for one, by all means, check that one out. So I'm just going to quickly go ahead and jump into this one. As I mentioned, it's going to be very simple and very crude, just to allow us to better test what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to start by creating a blueprint interface. I'll call that one BPI_interact. And I'm going to jump on in and add a new function on there called interact. And I'm going to add an input on there, which is going to be of type actor. And that's going to be the interaction instigator. So this is the person that's, or the thing that's trying to do the interaction. And what I want to do is on the world item, we'll start with that one, is we want to go to the class settings and we want to add that BPI that we've just created. So then under the interfaces section you should see that pop up. It should look like this. So what we can then do is essentially just replace the overlap event with that BPI interact. So the interaction instigator is the thing that's trying to interact, so in this case it'd be the player. So we'll just double check to make sure that's a pawn. If it is, we can try and get the infantry system from it. So we'll go ahead and delete that. Okay, so we've got the interaction event there. We do need one on the chest and container as well, so I'm just going to add that in. Actually, we'll come back to that later. So we've got the world item. Now we jump into the third person character. We do want to do a line trace on here. So we're going to do that on tick. Depending on how responsive you want it to be, you could always, if you don't need it to be as responsive, you can always change that to something like a timer. So it doesn't get fired every tick, but usually with something like this, you'll probably be fine anyway, to be fair. So then we want to do a line trace. I'm going to do by channel. Was it 4 objects? I can never remember. Link. Yeah, it's not that one, it's channel. By channel. Okay, there we go. Right, so do a quick branch. I'm going to set this for 1 frame for the debug. Okay, so we are third person, so let's get the camera Camera manager, player manager. Yeah. Get location. So we get the camera location. That's going to be the start, and then we need to get the viewport project. Yeah, I'm trying to remember a few nodes here. Deproject screen to world. There we go. Okay, so we started by getting the. Actually, well, we don't need this one. We can get that from the deproject there. Look, so we've got the world position, so that's fine. What we'll do, we've got the player controller. So from that we can deproject from the world. We do need the screen position, so for that we want the center of the screen. So we're going to get the viewport size. We're going to divide by 2. So we can plug in the world position, and then the world direction is the direction that it's going to be facing in the world. So we can multiply that by the trace distance. And then we want to add that to the world position. So let's reset, so we'll change that back. I'm going to promote that to a variable. Just do that interact distance. And we'll set that to a default of something like 400 for now. We can always come back in and tweak that as we need to. Okay, so we've got that. If we quickly test, we should be able to see the line trace. At the moment though, it kind of just looks like it's tracing from the hips of the character. That's not actually the case, it just happens that the line trace is stopping at the hips because that's what's being hit. So what we can always do is, well I find anyway, for third person with some sort of interaction, it can be quite nice just to actually offset the character so they're not stood in the center of the screen. So that's kind of what we're going to do here. So on the third person character on the camera boom, we can do a socket offset and a target offset. So we can kind of play around with these. Offset the end of the spring arm, offset the start of the spring arm, so that's the one we want. Which direction is it? So do minus, is it just 40? Try 60. Now you'll notice that they're not quite in the centre. Also, they could still be in the centre. So maybe we actually want the other one. So let's zero that back out and do it on the socket offset instead. There we go. So we're always going to orbit around the character's hips, but in terms of the camera itself, it's got a permanent offset. So you can kind of have a play around with that, see how you feel. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the arm length as well. So try 200. Yes, that'll be sufficient. Yeah, so we can look at the things, we can trace them. Okay. Now I'm not going to do a pop-up or anything like that. As I mentioned, we're only doing this just to help facilitate demonstrating some of the other features a little bit easier. But at this point what we can do is we can go back to the third person character and want to just break the hit result on the line trace by channel. And on the hit actor we can check if it has the interface. As interface. I can find it. Does object implement interface, and then you want to find the interact BPI. So if it doesn't implement the interact BPI, then we can ignore it. We don't need to do anything. If it does, we can come through and we can call the interact. Oh, actually, no. That's right. What we want to do is store a reference to it. So active interactable. Like so. So that's true. So I'll quickly run through this again in a second. So if we don't hit anything or what we've hit isn't an interactable, we do want to clear the active interactable as well, so we'll do that there. So now if we were to do a quick test, let's see if we can do this. Say, watch that value, pop it to the side. Now if I was to look at something, hopefully, no, it's not actually updating the data, but you can see how it's going to that particular bit. Yeah, it is showing the right one, so that's good. It's just not showing the data for some reason. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. So the last thing we need to do is just add a key for being able to interact. So what I'm going to do is go to the inputs folder, actions, and I'm going to create a new input action. IA interact. Like so. And we can leave everything else as it is. And then we want to go to the the IMC default, open that one up, and we want to add a new mapping to this one. And we want to choose the interact option, and we can go ahead and assign it a key. I don't think E was used in any of these. No. Okay. And then we can, with that done, we can save and close out. We'll jump back to the third person character. I want to add the interact event. And then what we can do on the active interact, we can grab a reference to it, and then want to right click and convert to a validated get. So what this does is just checks to make sure that we've actually got something referenced in that particular object. So just as a reminder, even though we have this here, this will always start off empty. And it only gets populated if we are looking at something that has the interactable, so the interact interface on it. That's the only time it'll get updated. Any other time it'll get cleared, so it'll be empty, and that's just kind of what that's checked. So it says has something, doesn't have something. So what we can do is connect that to the starter pin. You can always click the little down arrow if you can't see that. And if it is, we can then call that interact BPI message. And then, so we're going to call that BPI message on the active instigator. So you kind of think of it as that's going to call this. And then for the interaction instigator, we can just plug in self. So that'll pass a reference to the third person character. So if I was to go ahead and test this, we can see now we can pick things up by looking at them and interacting. Okay, so that's the start. As I said, the system itself is not going to be perfect. There's going to be a few issues with it, depending on what you're trying to do. But in terms of this example, it should be perfectly fine to keep us going a little bit further than we could do with the overlap system. Okay, so jumping back to the container chest, I'm actually going to go back to the main, so the parents, the BP container, and I'm going to add that interface, that interact interface. And then I'm going to implement that inside the container chest. And for this, I'm going to store a reference to the interaction instigator, just because we're not going to want to use it until later on, so it's not going to be in the same tick. So ideally we want to store it for later. Actually, we could always grab a reference into that as well, and if it is valid, we're going to do nothing. If it's not valid, then we'll do something. This can be useful if you want to allow your NPCs, for example, to interact with things in the world, or in this case, the chests, and you don't want the player to be able to open them whilst the NPC's there. It's up to you whether or not you want to do this sort of thing. But in this example, if it's not valid, then we want to go ahead and just play. And that's going to go ahead and open the chest container. Then what to do on the finished, I'm going to do a switch from the direction. So with the forward and the back. So if it's finished and it's gone forward, we know that it's open, so we need to open the inventory essentially, which we'll get to in a second. But we just want to go ahead and test to make sure that works. I'm going to add a quick print string. So we'll do open inventory, and then there'll be another one. So this is kind of when we actually we don't need to worry about that on the backwards. So let's quickly test it. So we'll drag a chest container into the world. So and if we press E, it'll open. So at that particular point, we can open the inventory. Now, at the moment, because we don't do anything else, we are kind of locked in. We can't do anything else with that particular chest. So let's move on. So we've done that. Now we're kind of at the point where, okay, we probably want to actually show something to the player. So in this case, we need some more UI. So we have the main inventory we have here, which you can open to display. So we kind of want to make something similar to that, but instead of just one container, we have two. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to duplicate the inventory container main. I'm going to do inventory, rename it to W_inventory_container. So this particular widget is going to be the one that contains two of those item containers. So I know it's probably been a while since we set that up, but the item container widget is specific in a nature where we can just pass it a inventory component, and it will then just extract all the items from it and essentially display it. So I'm going to go ahead and just add I'm going to wrap the size box in a horizontal box, and then I'm actually going to duplicate the size box with the item container. So we have the item container, and then I'm just going to rename these. So the left one, I'll put player on the side, and then that one's going to have container on the right. And then we'll add a little bit of padding just to keep them separate. That's so. Now, I do want to just double check some of these. So in terms of this, you can probably keep the on key down for now. Might need to modify that later. So go back to the event construct, just double check there. So it's here is where we actually initialize some of the data. So we have the play container, that's where we pass the inventory system to it. So we kind of need to do something similar for the main container. So in terms of getting access to that, we kind of need to think of how we're going to do this. So when we actually go to create the widget, it's going to be created here from within the container itself. Although it should probably be done here. So what I'm going to do is actually add a function to the parent container. I'm going to call that one open inventory widget. And then we want to create a widget, and we want to select the inventory container widget that we just created. So that's the copy of the main one. and then we will just store a reference to that. Inventory container widget. Just like so. And then in here we can just call that function. I forgot what we called it already. Open inventory widget, there we go. So this time, so we can just replace the print screen with that particular function. So if we were to actually go ahead and pick some items up and then open the inventory, nothing happens. And the reason why is because we never add this to the viewport. Again, if you've already got some sort of system up for pushing widgets to and from the viewport, particularly if you're using Common UI, this would obviously be a place where you would be using that instead. Generally, adding multiple things to the viewport isn't necessarily a good idea. I'm just going to do it here because setting up a system to handle that takes time, and obviously that's kind of out of scope a little bit for this particular project. So here I'm just going to do the add to viewport. Now if we try it this time, just pick up a few items, well all of them in this case, and then open the inventory. Once it's opened fully, we can see the inventory. Okay, so there was a few errors there. Let's have a quick look. Okay. Okay, so that's because inside of here, we do call the initialize inventory, but this particular variable is, we haven't specified it yet. Which is kind of what we need to do in a second. So what we can do is, because we're creating this widget inside the container itself, we can prompt this to a variable. So this can be the container inventory. Like so. And then we can mark that as instance editable and expose on spawn. And what that will do on the container, where we create the inventory container widget, we just refresh that, we should see that pop up. And what we can do is then just connect the inventory system component into that, and that will pass it through to the widget. Alternatively, what we could always do is, instead of having this called on construct, we could always actually have it as a function, which I guess I'll quickly show you that method as well, because both methods are perfectly valid. Depending on what you're doing, you may want to choose one over the other. So what we can do is, I'm just going to copy that. So I'm going to call this, create a new function, call this one initialize inventory. I'm just going to paste that in. And I'm going to move the focus first item to the end, just because there may be times, I'm probably not going to show it in this particular video, but there may be times where you might want to automatically focus on the first item that's available regardless of which inventory it's in. So it might be that if the player's inventory has nothing in it, so you might want to focus on the first item in the container, and normally you'd need to do that after it's all initialized. So having that last can be quite beneficial. So I'm just going to unhook the container inventory widget variable, and I'm going to add some inputs to this particular function and connect them to the relevant initialize inventory. I'm going to rename that to inventory widget, just so we can distinguish the two. Now, in terms of the inputs on these, I'm just going to do inventory player. Actually, I'll probably do that as primary, and then we'll do that one as secondary. Primary being the one on the left, and then secondary being the one on the right. Now, if we go back to the container, we can technically unhook this. And what I'll actually do as well, just to prevent confusion, I'm just going to mark that as not exposed. You know what, I'm just going to delete it. And we're going to go ahead and delete everything on the construct as well. Jump back to the container, just refresh these. Okay, so now we've gone ahead and done that. We need to actually physically call that function. So the initialize inventory widget. I'm just going to separate this over. Right, so now you'll probably notice that on the initialize inventory widget function, we now have those two inputs that we specified. So the inventory primary and then the inventory secondary. So at this particular point, from the container itself, we can denote what it is that we want to specify. So we know for the secondary one, we want that to be the inventory systems on this blueprint itself, so we can get that in. And the primary one is going to be for the player. Now at the moment, we don't have any way of getting that from here. So what I'm going to do, on the container chest, we do store reference to that in here. Well, this particular variable, however, isn't in the parent. So what we can do is right click, we can move to parent class. So now this here will still function. You'll notice it's not showing up in the list, but if I click show inherited variables, it should be in the long list of things that we have here. I don't normally have it shown. It's up to you if you want to do that. But because we've now done that, we have access to this particular widget variable. Normally this is going to be invalid, which in itself isn't too much of an issue. But what I'm going to do is then get component by class, and we can get the inventory system, and we can go ahead and just connect it to the primary. This particular method can be quite nice because you can technically, if you wanted to, show the container for multiple inventories just by using the same widget. You don't have to pass in the inventory system from the player. It can be two inventory systems and it'll just show the items that are in there. Now, if we give this a quick test, hopefully that should still be working. Let's quickly pick some of these up. Yep, there we go. So that pops up. So we don't have anything in the inventory one yet, but at the moment we can still move around. So I do want to quickly address that as well. So on the third person character, we do set the input mode to UI only. So I want to go ahead and do the same thing here as well. So when we add to viewport, I'm going to set the game mode to that. So that should stop the player from being able to move around. And then we do also need to then show the cursor. I'm trying to remember how it is we achieved that. Can't remember if that was in the widget or not. Nope, it's not there. Wasn't on the key down. Don't think we did it in here. No, I can't remember where I put that in the original. Nonetheless, we do need to set the mouse cursor, so we'll do show mouse cursor, and we'll set that to true as well. That's just in the BP container after we've created the widget and we've added it to the viewport. Let's quickly double check just to make sure that's, yeah, so we've got the cursor now. We can press I still, but nothing actually happens at the moment. So what I am actually going to do in this particular example, because we actually have a few things we want to happen when the inventory is closed. So for example, we want this to reverse, so it closes the lid, and then we also need to do a few other things to handle other things. So what I'm going to do is, in the inventory container widget, so this one here where we have the two, I am going to add in an event dispatcher. It's going to be on container, do inf container closed, and on the on key down, I'm going to call. That's where we do it. Set the input mode there, so we don't need to worry about that. So that sets it back to game. That's fine. So I'm going to then call the event dispatcher, which is the inventory container closed. And then going back to the BP container, when we first create the widget, so this is before we do anything else with it, we can bind to that specific one, or alternatively, we can actually add it to here. So we could bind so, and actually add an input to the delegate on the input there. I'm just going to quickly sort this out a little bit. Okay, and then if we go back to the container, you'll notice that there's now a one on there. So I'm just going to rename the delegate's input to on closed. So you kind of think of this as the event that we want to happen when it's closed, essentially. And I'm going to go ahead and create an event. So again, we are back in the main BP container. And I'm just going to create a matching function. I'm going to rename that one to on inventory inf widget close. Just like so. And the last thing I'm going to do as well, in terms of the container, just going back to the on key down. Once we've actually called the on inventory closed, I am going to call the unbind all. So anything that's bound to this specific event will get unbound as well. That can just help prevent certain delegates sort of lingering on actors that might not, or in this case widgets that might not actually be used or needed at that particular point. In a lot of cases, a lot of the bugs I tend to have are ones where I've forgotten to unbind something and then things happen that shouldn't happen because of it. So it is just something to be aware of when you are using bindings and whatnot. Okay, so we've done that. Let's have a quick check. So when we do close, we do want to set the mouse cursor show back to this, so we don't show it. And then what we can do, jump back to the BP container chest. We want to add I'm going to add an event, custom event to the reverse. So this will be the close lid. Let's say. I do want to say I apologise if I'm going quite quickly. I am trying to get through quite a lot in a short space of time, just so the videos don't drag on too much. Yeah, so we've got the close lid custom event connected to the reverse on the timeline. This is going to allow us to essentially close the lid. What we do need to do though is actually call that. So we're going to override the on inventory widget closed, and then we're just going to add a call to that close lid after we've done this here. So the on inventory widget closed, we've got the call to parents. That's going to do the mouse cursor and anything else we might choose to add to it, and then it's going to call the close lid one. So now if we go back in, we interact, shows the inventories, close it, everything goes back to normal. And we can still show our individual widgets. So let's quickly pick these up again. Okay, So there is one last thing we need to attend to. So at the moment we can't interact with it together. So what we need to make sure we are doing as well is clearing the interaction instigator. So interaction instigator. Want to set the interaction instigator, and we can just set that and just leave that blank, and that'll set it back to null. And that just means that when we come back in here again, it'll allow us to go through. So quickly try it again. So interact with it once. Oh, great. And then we can interact with it again. Like so. We can currently still use the items in here as well. It may cause problems with the secondary infantry, but we can address that when we get to it. So in terms of part 7, that is where I'm going to leave it today. Obviously, I know I've gone over quite a lot already. So just as a quick reminder, we've gone ahead and implemented a very quick interaction system, and we've set up a chest that allows us to display 2 infantries at once. Doesn't seem very exciting at the moment because it doesn't show anything, which actually I was wondering if have a quick see if there's any way to display that. No. Yeah, I'll leave that for another episode. So yeah, so as I said, it might not necessarily seem particularly exciting at the moment because even though we can interact with the chest, we don't see any items on this right hand side as of yet. In the next episode though, what I will most likely go over is setting up, being able to pre-populate items in your chest, and hopefully, if we have time, go over being able to transfer items across from one container to the other, well, one infantry to the other. Okay, so I just want to say thanks for watching. Hopefully you've found this video useful. If you have, by all means leave a like on the video. If you have any questions, drop it in the comments. If it's more of a complicated question, I do have a Discord, so the link to that will be in the description as well. So go ahead and jump on that. Sometimes it does tend to be easier to guide and help people through Discord than it is through the YouTube comments. So yeah, also I do have a Ko-Fi page, so if you do want to support me, you can do so on there. So yeah, again, I just want to say thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care. Bye.